What if your worst suspicions about your soon-to-be stepmother were true? Imagine standing up at your father's wedding, knowing you're about to shatter his happiness, but also save his life. Maya's stomach twisted as she stood in the hallway outside her father's room. The wedding was in just a few hours, and the clock was ticking. Her mind raced with everything she'd uncovered about Isabel, but every time she tried to imagine telling her dad, her throat tightened, and her heart started hammering. He wouldn't believe her. He couldn't. But she had to try. With shaky hands, she knocked on the door. David's voice came from inside, muffled but warm.
Come in, Maya.
She pushed the door open to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up, smiling.
Nervous for the big day?
He teased, trying to lighten the mood. Maya forced a weak smile. This was it. She couldn't back out now.
Dad, we need to talk.
David's smile faded slightly, replaced by concern.
What's wrong?
Just as she opened her mouth to explain, to lay everything out, the door behind her creaked open, and in walked Isabel, dressed in a silk robe, her hair pinned back in a mess of curls that made her look effortlessly elegant.
David,
She said in her soft, sweet voice.
we need to finalize the seating chart. The caterer is asking.
Maya froze. Of course, Isabel had perfect timing. She always did. It was as if she knew when Maya was about to say something and swooped in at the last second to stop her. Isabel's eyes flickered toward Maya for a brief moment, but there was no warmth there, just a coldness that Maya felt deep in her gut. David looked between the two of them, the smile returning to his face, though his eyes still held a hint of worry.
We can talk after the ceremony, Maya. Okay? Let's not stress before the big moment.
Maya felt her heart sink. No, they couldn't talk after the ceremony. There wouldn't be any point then. It would be too late.
Dad,
She started, her voice desperate now, but Isabel placed a hand on David's arm, steering him toward the door.
David, sweetheart, the caterer's waiting.
Maya's words died in her throat. Isabel had done it again, cut her off, subtly but effectively, and her father, blinded by love, didn't even see it. As they left the room, Maya stood there, feeling more helpless than ever. How could she stop the wedding when Isabel always seemed 2 steps ahead? She had to find another way. Hours passed, and the hall was buzzing with guests arriving, laughter filling the air as people greeted one another. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the ceremony space. The decorations were immaculate, with flowers draped over every surface, their fragrance mingling with the anticipation of what was about to happen. Maya felt like she was suffocating. Everywhere she looked, people were smiling, talking about how beautiful Isabel was, how happy David seemed. She wanted to scream at all of them, to tell them that none of this was real, that the woman they thought was so perfect was hiding something so much darker. Her eyes darted to the front of the room, where David stood, laughing with one of his friends. He looked happy, really happy. And for a moment, Maya hesitated. Could she really ruin this for him? What if she was wrong? What if Isabel wasn't as bad as she thought? But then, like clockwork, Isabel appeared, gliding into the room in her wedding gown. The guests gasped, admiring her beauty, but all Maya saw was the woman who had manipulated her way into her father's life. Isabel's eyes caught hers, and there it was again. That coldness. The reminder that Isabel was always in control. The ceremony was minutes away from starting, and Maya's pulse quickened. She had to do something, but her body wouldn't move. Fear held her in place, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She couldn't just stand up in front of everyone and ruin the wedding. Could she? Her mind raced, replaying the conversation she overheard, the financial papers she found. All the signs were there, but she still didn't know if anyone would believe her, especially her father. What would he think of her if she interrupted his wedding only to be wrong? Would he ever forgive her? Maya! A voice broke her from her thoughts. Her cousin Jenna was rushing over, looking excited. It's starting soon! Can you believe it? Everything is so perfect! Perfect? Nothing about this was perfect. Maya smiled weakly, trying to mask the turmoil swirling inside her.
Yeah, perfect.
Jenna prattled on about the flowers and the decorations, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside Maya's mind. But Maya wasn't listening. Her eyes kept flicking back to Isabel, who was now standing at the front of the room, chatting with a group of guests, her laughter sounding hollow to Maya's ears. The officiant stepped up to the altar, signaling that it was time to begin. The guests quieted down, taking their seats, and the music swelled, filling the room with soft, melodic notes. Isabel stood in place, her veil pulled over her face, and David took his position at the front, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Maya's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had dreaded for weeks. She had minutes, maybe even seconds, to make a choice. But what could she do? The procession began. Bridesmaids and groomsmen walked down the aisle, all smiling, all happy. And as each one passed, Maya's chest grew tighter. She didn't know what to do. Her mind screamed at her to stand up, to say something, to stop this before it was too late. But her legs wouldn't move. Her voice wouldn't come. The room fell silent as the final notes of the music echoed, and the officiant smiled warmly at the couple. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of David and Isabel. Maya barely heard the words. Her vision blurred, and the walls of the room seemed to close in on her. She couldn't let this happen. But as the officiant continued, Isabel's smile never wavered. It was the same smile she'd worn from the beginning. Fake. Manipulative. Maya clenched her fists. She couldn't sit there and watch her father be taken in by it any longer. He deserved better than this. Better than someone who was using him for money. The pressure was building inside her, like a dam about to break. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. If she didn't speak up, she'd never forgive herself. She glanced at her father again. He was staring at Isabel like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. It was like watching someone walk off a cliff, completely unaware of the fall waiting for them. Maya took a deep breath. Her body trembled, but the weight of the moment settled over her like a blanket. She had to do this. There was no other choice. The officiant asked Isabel and David to exchange their vows, and the room grew still, waiting for their words of love. But just as Isabel opened her mouth to speak, Maya stood up. Her heart pounded in her chest, louder than the music had been, louder than anything else in the room. Every pair of eyes turned to her, confusion etched on their faces. But Maya didn't care. She wasn't afraid anymore. She couldn't be.
I can't let this happen.
She said, her voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. David looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion.
Maya?
Maya's legs wobbled, but she stayed standing.
I have to tell you something, Dad. I should have told you earlier, but I can't stay silent anymore.
Isabel's smile flickered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure.
Maya, sweetheart, you're probably just nervous.
No,
Maya interrupted, her voice stronger now.
I'm not nervous. I know exactly what I'm saying.
The room was silent, every guest holding their breath, waiting for what was about to come next. Maya's voice echoed through the room, silencing the soft murmurs of the guests. All eyes were on her now, and the weight of their stares made her legs feel weak. But she couldn't sit down. Not now,
Dad,
she said again, her voice a little steadier this time.
I need to talk to you. Right now.
David stood frozen at the altar, confusion clouding his face. He glanced at Isabel, whose serene smile had faltered ever so slightly. Isabel's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Maya saw the coldness return. But then Isabel turned to the crowd, laughing softly, as if to brush away the interruption like an errant breeze.
Maya,
David began, his voice gentle but filled with warning.
this isn't the time. What's going on?
Maya swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment everything would either fall apart or come together. She glanced around at the faces in the crowd, some curious, some concerned, some already shaking their heads. She had to make them see. She had to make him see.
Dad, I know this is going to sound crazy,
She started, taking a deep breath.
but I need you to trust me. I can't let you marry Isabel.
A murmur rippled through the guests, and David's eyes widened in disbelief.
Maya, what are you talking about?
Isabel's voice cut in, soothing, but with an edge Maya hadn't noticed before.
Sweetheart, you're just feeling overwhelmed. Weddings can do that to people, especially kids. Maybe we should...
No!
Maya's voice was louder than she intended, startling even herself. She couldn't let Isabel take control of the situation. Not this time.
Dad, listen to me. Isabel isn't who she says she is. She's planning to hurt you. I overheard her on the phone, talking about your money, and I found papers, legal papers, that prove she's trying to take everything from you.
The room went deathly silent, as if the very air had been sucked out. The guests exchanged nervous glances, some leaning in to whisper to each other. David stared at Maya, his mouth slightly open, as if struggling to process what she had just said.
Maya, where is this coming from? I don't understand.
Maya took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling.
I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. I overheard her in the study, talking to someone about how she's going to have control over all the businesses once you're married. I found documents in her drawer. Secret stuff about your finances, your life insurance and will. She's been planning this the whole time.
David shook his head, as if trying to shake off her words. His eyes darted toward Isabel, who stood silent now, her expression unreadable.
Isabel, what is this about?
Isabel's calm demeanor remained intact, though there was a flicker of something darker behind her eyes. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on David's arm.
David, I don't know what Maya is talking about. Maybe she's upset because things are changing. It's been a lot for her, with the wedding and all.
Maya's frustration bubbled over.
I'm not upset about the wedding. I'm upset because you're lying to him. You're trying to take advantage of my dad.
David looked back at Maya, his face a mixture of shock and confusion.
Maya, enough. This is ridiculous.
The word hit Maya like a punch in the gut. Ridiculous. How could he think she was making this up? She had proof, but the look on his face told her he wasn't listening. He was blinded. By love, by trust, by everything Isabel had shown him on the surface.
Dad, please, just look at the papers. Just listen to what I heard. I'm not making this up.
David sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead as if trying to ward off a headache.
Maya, you've been through a lot since your mother passed. I know this is a big change for you. I know it's scary, but Isabel is not trying to hurt me. She loves me, and I love her. This is not about money.
Isabel stepped closer, her voice soft and sweet again.
Maya, sweetheart, I know you're scared. I understand. But I would never do anything to hurt your father. I love him.
Maya's hands clenched into fists. Every word Isabel said felt like poison, and yet the crowd was eating it up. The tension in the room had shifted. People were looking at her now, not with concern, but with judgment, as if she were the one ruining everything.
Maya, this has gone too far. You need to sit down. We can talk about this later.
No!
Maya shouted, her desperation rising.
We can't talk about it later. If you marry her, it'll be too late. She'll control everything.
David's face hardened, and Maya could see the embarrassment creeping in now. The whispers among the guests had grown louder, and he was painfully aware of the spectacle unfolding before him.
Maya, stop this, right now.
He commanded, his voice sharp. Maya blinked, her vision blurring with tears. She could feel the judgment from the room closing in on her. Nobody believed her. Not her dad, not the guests, no one. Isabel had spun her web so perfectly that any attempt to reveal the truth only made Maya look like the bad guy. Isabel's hand tightened on David's arm, her voice a low, soothing hum.
David, maybe she just needs some time. This is all so overwhelming for her.
No, Isabel.
David said, his voice firm, though his eyes were still clouded with confusion.
Maya's acting out because she's scared of losing me. That's all this is.
Maya felt like the ground was falling out from under her. She had laid everything bare, all her fears, all her evidence, and yet no one was listening. David's face was filled with disappointment. The guests were shaking their heads in disapproval, and Isabel was standing there, calm and collected, as if she hadn't just been exposed for who she truly was. It didn't look good for Maya. It looked like she was the problem, the stubborn kid who couldn't accept change. But she knew the truth. She knew what Isabel was hiding, even if no one else did. Flashback. It had all started a few weeks ago, on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Maya was bored, stuck inside while her father and Isabel were busy with wedding plans. The house felt too big, too quiet, and she wandered aimlessly from room to room, looking for something to do. Isabel had been nice enough, too nice, if Maya was being honest. She'd always seemed to hover just a little too close, like she was watching Maya, waiting for her to slip up. Maya hadn't meant to eavesdrop. In fact, she hadn't even realized she was doing it until she heard Isabel's voice from behind the slightly ajar study door. The tone was different, sharper than Maya was used to. The usual sweet lilt gone. Maya paused in the hallway, frowning as she strained to hear what Isabel was saying. Something about it didn't sit right with her.
She doesn't suspect anything,
Isabel was saying, her voice low and clipped. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath so she wouldn't make a sound.
Yes, everything will go as planned after the wedding. David will sign over the assets like the little puppy dog he is once it's official.
Maya's mind raced. What was she talking about? Who was Isabel speaking to? Her father? No, David was out with the caterer, finalizing the wedding menu. Isabel continued talking, her words growing more ominous by the second.
The fool, he's completely blind to it. It won't take long before it's all mine.
Isabel said with a cold chuckle, the sound sending chills down Maya's spine.
Just make sure you're ready when I need those documents processed. We are going to get rid of him, one way or another.
Maya's pulse quickened as she pieced together the fragments of the conversation. Isabel was planning something bad. She was talking about her father like he was.
Some kind of pawn, just a piece in her plan. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Could it be true? Could Isabel really be plotting against David? Her mind whirled as she silently retreated from the doorway, not wanting to hear more, but at the same time, needing to know exactly what was happening. She felt like she was walking through a fog, her limbs heavy, her thoughts chaotic. The kind, gentle woman who had showered her father with affection wasn't who she appeared to be. Maya's gut twisted with uncertainty. For days, Maya tried to push it to the back of her mind. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe it was some kind of business deal or wedding-related arrangement that she just didn't get. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that everything was fine, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Every time she looked at Isabel, she saw the smile that never quite reached her eyes, the calculated way she moved around the house, always so perfectly composed. Maya knew she had to find out more. She had to be sure. That's when she started snooping. She knew it wasn't right. but something in her heart told her she needed to protect her father, even if it meant breaking a few rules. One afternoon, while Isabel was out meeting with the florist, Maya snuck into the study. The room was neat, almost too neat, with everything arranged perfectly in its place. The desk drawers were locked, but Maya knew where Isabel kept the spare keys. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock, her breath quickening as the drawer slid open with a soft click. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just wedding contracts, brochures, and guest lists. But then, tucked away beneath a stack of papers, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a pile of legal documents, something about power of attorney and financial control, life insurance documents. Maya wasn't sure what all the jargon meant, but the general idea was clear. Once David and Isabel were married, Isabel would have control over all of his assets. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the paper, her hands shaking. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was about her father's entire life. Isabel was planning to take everything from him. She shoved the papers back into the drawer and closed it quietly, her mind racing. She had proof now, proof that Isabel wasn't who she claimed to be. But what could she do with it? How could she confront her father without him thinking she was just a scared little girl who didn't want a stepmother? For the next few days, Maya wrestled with herself. She considered burning the documents or taking them to her dad right then and there, but every time she tried to muster the courage, doubt crept in. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was lying? Isabel had done such a good job of making herself seem perfect, of worming her way into David's life. Maya knew her father trusted Isabel completely, and the thought of him dismissing her claims terrified Maya more than anything else. The pressure built up inside her, growing stronger each day as the wedding drew closer. She knew she had to say something, but she couldn't find the right moment. Isabel was always there, always hovering, making sure Maya didn't get too close to her father. And now, on the day of the wedding, the weight of it all was crushing her. Back in the present,
Maya,
David said gently.
I know you're having a hard time adjusting to this, but Isabel would never do anything to hurt me. You're just confused.
I'm not confused.
Maya cried, her frustration bubbling over.
She's lying to you. She doesn't love you. She's just using you.
The silence that followed was suffocating. David's expression darkened as he turned to Isabel, who stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale but composed.
Isabel, I need to make sense of this.
David said, his voice quiet but firm.
What's going on? Is there any truth to this?
Isabel's eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, Maya almost believed her. She looked hurt, devastated even.
David, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know why Maya is saying these things. I would never hurt you. I love you. It's all just a misunderstanding.
The guests watched the exchange with wide eyes, torn between believing the heartbroken bride or the desperate daughter. Isabel wiped at her eyes, sniffling softly.
Maya, I know this is hard for you, she said, her voice laced with sadness. You've been through so much since your mother passed, and I know I can never replace her, but I would never do anything to harm your father. I'm trying so hard to be a part of your life, but it feels like you don't want me there.
Maya's fists clenched at her sides. Isabel was playing the victim now, twisting everything around to make it seem like she was the one being hurt. And worse, it was working. She could see the uncertainty in her father's eyes, the way he was starting to doubt his own daughter.
Dad, please, Maya said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You have to believe me. I'm not making this up.
David sighed heavily, rubbing his temples.
Maya, I think you're scared, and I get that. But this is my decision. Isabel isn't trying to hurt me.
Maya's heart sank. It was happening. Exactly what she had feared. Her father wasn't going to believe her. Isabel had him wrapped around her finger, and no matter what Maya said, it wasn't enough.
David, Isabel said softly, stepping closer to him. I would never do anything to betray your trust. I love you with all my heart.
David looked at her, his face softening as she reached for his hand. Maya watched in disbelief as her father's shoulders relaxed, as if the storm had passed. He wasn't going to listen to her. He wasn't going to stop the wedding. Isabel turned to the guests, offering a small, tearful smile.
I know this must be confusing for all of you, she said, her voice shaking. Maya has been struggling with this for a while now. I've been trying to be patient, but I think this is just her way of acting out. I hope you all can understand how difficult this has been for her.
The guests nodded, murmuring their support, and Maya felt her world crumbling around her. No one believed her. They all thought she was just a scared little girl who couldn't handle her father getting remarried. But she knew the truth, and no amount of tears or sweet words from Isabel would change that. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, sensing that the tension had reached its peak. Perhaps we should continue with the ceremony, he said hesitantly, glancing between David, Isabel, and Maya. David nodded, still holding Isabel's hand.
Let's just get this over with.
Maya's stomach twisted in knots. It wasn't over. Not for her. But as she watched her father turn back to the altar, ready to continue with the vows, she knew she had lost. For now. Isabel shot her a brief, knowing glance. The kind of look that said, "You tried, but I've already won." David's face was flushed, caught between disappointment and confusion. He stood next to Isabel, his hand resting awkwardly on her arm, as if he didn't quite know whether to comfort her or question her. Isabel, meanwhile, had retreated slightly, her hands folded neatly in front of her, the picture of a poised, graceful bride. But Maya could see it. In the faintest flicker of Isabel's eyes, the way her lips tightened just a bit too much, there was something darker underneath. The facade was cracking, if only for a moment, and Maya knew she had to push harder. She couldn't let Isabel regain control.
Dad, please, Maya said, her voice more confident now, though the tremor in her hands remained. Just think for a second. You've known Isabel for what? A year? You've only known her version of things, but I've seen the truth. I've seen what she's really planning.
David's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, a flicker of doubt flashing across his face. But just as quickly, Isabel stepped in, her voice soft, almost a whisper.
David, you know how much I love you, she said, turning toward him, her hand resting gently on his chest. This has been hard for Maya, but she's just confused. She's young, and she's still confused. I've tried to be patient, but she's pushing me to a point where I don't know how to reach her anymore.
The words were perfect, calculated, designed to make her seem like the victim, to make everyone think that Maya was the one in the wrong. And the room seemed to lean toward Isabel, buying into her performance. But Maya wasn't done yet.
Confused? Maya repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. I'm not confused. I'm not some little kid who doesn't understand what's going on. I found the papers, Isabel. I heard you talking. This isn't about me or how I'm feeling. This is about you and what you're trying to do to my dad.
Isabel's eyes flashed with something Maya hadn't seen before. Anger. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that familiar mask of calm.
Maya, she said, her voice edged with a forced sweetness. This is not the time to be airing out misunderstandings. We can talk about this later. Please, don't make a scene.
But it was too late for that. The scene had already been made. And the more Isabel tried to play the innocent, the more Maya saw through her act. David shifted uncomfortably, his brow furrowed as he looked between his daughter and his fiancée. Maya could see the wheels turning in his head, the uncertainty beginning to gnaw at him. He wanted to believe Isabel, but the way Maya kept standing firm, there was something about her conviction that he couldn't ignore. One of the older women sitting in the front row, one of David's longtime friends, Mrs. Harper, leaned forward, her voice low but cutting through the silence. "I don't know," she said thoughtfully, her brow creased. "I did see Isabel talking to someone outside earlier. It was strange, almost secretive, but I figured it was just pre-wedding nerves." A murmur spread through the crowd, and Maya felt a spark of hope. She wasn't the only one noticing things now. The cracks in Isabel's perfect image were starting to show, but Isabel wasn't done yet. Her calm demeanor slipped for just a second, just enough for Maya to catch the hardness in her eyes. "You're making a big mistake," Isabel muttered, her voice barely audible to anyone but Maya and David. It was a veiled threat, but it landed hard. David glanced at Isabel, his confusion deepening.
What do you mean by that?"
Isabel quickly recovered, her eyes wide with feigned innocence.
I just mean, this day is supposed to be about love, about us coming together as a family, and Maya she's tearing it apart. This was supposed to be a happy moment for all of us.
Maya's fists clenched at her sides. Isabel's performance was seamless, but there was something new in the way she spoke now. A slight crack in her voice, a shadow of her real self slipping through. Maya wasn't imagining it. Isabel was losing control, even if only bit by bit. David, still clearly torn, turned to the crowd, as if searching for validation, for some sign that what Maya was saying couldn't possibly be true. But instead of finding comfort, he found uncertainty. More guests were shifting in their seats, murmuring to one another, some exchanging concerned glances. The cracks were widening. A man from the back, someone Maya didn't recognize, spoke up. "You know," he said slowly, "I thought I saw Isabel at the courthouse last week. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I'm hearing all this..." Maya felt the tension in the room rise. Isabel's grip on the situation was slipping, and Maya wasn't about to let her regain control. "Dad," she said, stepping closer to him, her voice urgent. "Please, just take a second and think. Things aren't adding up. Isabel has been hiding things from you, and now people are starting to see it." David ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed.
"I don't know what to think," he muttered, his voice strained. He turned to Isabel, his eyes searching her face for answers. "Isabel, is there anything you haven't told me? Anything I should know?"
Isabel's face tightened ever so slightly, but her response was quick.
David, I've been nothing but honest with you. I love you, and I've been doing everything I can to make this day perfect. Maya is just scared of losing you. She doesn't want me in her life, and that's why she's doing this.
Maya's frustration boiled over.
This isn't about me not wanting a stepmother. This is about you lying to my dad, manipulating him, and now people are starting to see through you.
For the first time, Isabel's control slipped. Her voice, which had been so soft and composed, took on a sharper edge.
I've had enough of this, she snapped, her tone colder now. David, can't you see? Maya is doing this because she can't handle change. She's trying to ruin everything because she's scared of losing you to me.
The guests shifted again, their whispers growing louder. Maya stood her ground, feeling a surge of determination. Isabel was unraveling, and Maya knew she was getting closer to the truth.
You're the one trying to ruin everything, Maya said, her voice steady. You're trying to control him, to take everything from him, and now that people are starting to question you, you're getting scared.
Isabel's face twisted for a split second, a flash of anger crossing her features, but she quickly smoothed it over, her voice returning to its sickly sweetness.
David, please, she said, reaching for his hand again. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who's been here for you through everything.
But David pulled his hand away, his expression conflicted.
I don't know, Isabel, he said, his voice shaky. Something doesn't feel right.
Isabel's eyes widened, panic flickering in them for the first time. David, she whispered, her voice low and dangerous now. You know I've done everything for you. Don't let her ruin this for us. Maya's heart raced as she watched her father, his face a mask of uncertainty. She knew she had to keep pushing, had to make him see the truth before it was too late. Another voice broke through the tense silence. I always thought there was something off, said Mr. Sanders, an old family friend. Isabel's always been so secretive about things. I didn't want to say anything, but now it makes sense. The murmurs grew louder, and Maya saw the shift in the room. People were beginning to doubt Isabel, to see through the cracks in her perfect image. David's expression darkened as he looked at Isabel, his voice shaky but firm. Isabel, what is going on? Why are there so many things I don't know? Isabel's calm demeanor finally shattered. Her eyes flashed with anger, and her voice came out in a low hiss.
You're making a mistake, David. A big mistake. If you listen to her, you'll regret it.
The guest gasped, and Maya felt her heart leap. There it was. The mask was gone.
David took a step back, shock crossing his face.
What are you saying?
Isabel's face twisted into something unrecognizable, cold, hard, and full of fury.
You think she's telling the truth? If so, you're an idiot, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. She's just a little girl. She doesn't know anything about the real world, about what it takes to survive.
The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Maya stood frozen, watching as her father slowly realized the truth. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had planned to marry, wasn't who she seemed. David's voice trembled as he spoke.
Isabel, you've been lying to me.
Isabel let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and twisted.
Lying? No, David. I was protecting you. From your own stupidity. You're too naive, too trusting. You don't know how to handle real life.
Maya's breath caught in her throat as she watched her father's face pale. He had finally seen it. The truth that Maya had been trying to show him all along. The guests were in shock, some murmuring in disbelief, others staring in silence. David shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe this! Isabel's eyes narrowed, her voice low and dangerous. You should have listened to me, David. Now it's too late. Maya stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Dad, you need to leave. Now, before she does something worse. David looked at Maya, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. He had been betrayed, and now he was finally beginning to understand the depth of Isabel's manipulation. Slowly he nodded, taking a step away from Isabel. The room was silent as David turned to face the guests.
I think the wedding's over.
Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was over. Finally. Isabel's mask had slipped, and everyone had seen her for who she truly was. The wedding was off. But as Isabel stood there, glaring at Maya with a look of pure hatred, Maya knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. There was still more to uncover, more truth to be revealed. But for now, she had won this battle. And as the guests began to murmur and shuffle out of the room, Maya stayed close to her father, ready for whatever came next. Just as David took a step back from Isabel, the faint sound of police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each second. Someone in the crowd must have called them, sensing that things were spiraling out of control. The murmur of guests became louder, the uneasy atmosphere creeping into every corner of the room. David's hand rested on Maya's shoulder, his grip trembling slightly.
He was still processing everything. Isabel's lies, the collapse of the wedding, and the betrayal that had just been laid bare in front of him. But there was no time for reflection. The situation was far from over. Within minutes, 2 police officers entered the hall, their presence cutting through the escalating chaos. The guests parted to make room for them, everyone unsure of what would happen next. The lead officer, a tall man with a calm but authoritative demeanor, stepped forward, his eyes quickly scanning the room, assessing the situation. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. David, still in shock, looked at Maya, unsure of how to explain what had just transpired. Maya stepped forward, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "There's been an incident," she said, keeping her gaze on Isabel, who remained silent, her expression unreadable.
My father was about to marry this woman, but she's been lying to him. She's been planning to steal his money, signing documents fraudulently, and she was going to unalive him.
The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing between Maya and David, then shifting his attention to Isabel. "Is this true?" Isabel's icy smile returned, though it no longer had the charm it once did. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her, she shook her head with exaggerated innocence.
This is ridiculous, she said, her voice sharp. It's just a misunderstanding. Maya's upset about the wedding. She doesn't want her father to move on, so she's been making up lies. I would never hurt David.
David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The police officers looked back at Maya, waiting for more information, their expressions skeptical but professional. Maya took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that would change everything.
I heard Isabel talking on the phone weeks ago, making plans about taking over my dad's assets once they were married, she explained. And I found documents in her study, legal papers about controlling his finances. I tried to stop the wedding before it got this far, but no one would believe me. She even planned to get someone to do it to unalive him.
The officer glanced at Isabel again. Is there any truth to what she's saying? Do you have anything to say about these claims? Isabel's face twisted, but she kept her voice even.
Of course not, she replied coolly. This is all a mistake. There are no documents, no plans to harm David. I've done nothing but love him. And this is how I'm repaid? By his daughter trying to ruin our day?
The officer's partner, a younger woman who had been silent up to this point, stepped forward. We're going to need to check Isabel's belongings, she said. Given the seriousness of these accusations, it's best we take a closer look. Isabel's eyes flashed with anger, and she took a step back.
You can't do that,
she said, her voice shaking slightly.
There's no reason to search my things. I haven't done anything wrong.
Maya watched as the officer gave Isabel a long, hard look. If you've got nothing to hide, he said calmly, then this won't be a problem. Isabel opened her mouth to protest, but it was clear that the situation was slipping out of her control. The second officer motioned toward Isabel's handbag, which was resting on a nearby chair. Let's start with this, she said. Reluctantly, Isabel stepped aside as the officer approached her bag. The guests watched in tense silence, the tension palpable as everyone waited to see what would unfold. Maya felt her pulse quicken, unsure of what, if anything, they would find. But she knew, deep down, that Isabel had been too confident for too long. There had to be something. As the officer rifled through Isabel's handbag, her movements deliberate and careful, she suddenly paused. Reaching into one of the side pockets, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, her eyes narrowing as she examined it. Maya held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The officer unfolded the paper and scanned it quickly before turning to her partner. You're going to want to take a look at this, she said, her tone serious. The lead officer stepped forward, taking the paper from her and reading it over. His expression hardened as he turned back to Isabel. Care to explain this? He asked, holding up the document for everyone to see. It was one of the legal papers Maya had found, the one detailing Isabel's plan to gain control of David's assets after their marriage. It also had a plan of where the murder was going to take place. The guests gasped, whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Isabel's face paled, and for the first time, she looked truly cornered.
I don't know how that got there, she stammered, her voice faltering. This isn't mine. Someone must have planted it.
David's eyes widened in horror as he stared at the document. The betrayal, the disbelief, it was all there, etched across his face.
Isabel, he said quietly, his voice trembling. What is this? What were you planning?
Isabel's mask finally crumbled. The facade of the loving, innocent fiancé fell away, and the real Isabel emerged, cold, calculating, and furious.
You're such an idiot, Monkey David, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. I've been playing you this whole time, and you never even saw it coming.
The guests recoiled at her words, the shock rippling through the room. Maya felt a mix of relief and horror as Isabel's true colors finally came to the surface. She had been right all along, but hearing Isabel admit it so openly was more terrifying than she had imagined.
You were going to marry me and hand over everything, Isabel continued, her voice rising in anger. Your money, your business, your house, it was all going to be mine. And once I had it, once the paperwork was done, I was going to leave you and your monkey daughter. You think I actually care about you? I never did.
David took a step back, his face ashen. He looked like he was going to be sick.
I can't believe this, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I trusted you.
Isabel let out a bitter laugh. You shouldn't have. You were just a means to an end, David. You and your clueless daughter.
Maya's blood boiled at the mention of herself, but she held her ground, watching as the police officers exchanged a glance. It was over now. Isabel had exposed herself, and there was no turning back. The lead officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Isabel, you're under arrest, he said, his voice firm. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Isabel's eyes widened in disbelief, and she took a step back, her body tense with fury.
You can't arrest me, she screamed. I haven't done anything wrong. It's all her fault. She pointed a shaking finger at Maya, her face twisted with rage. She set this whole thing up. She's trying to ruin me.
But it was too late. The officers moved in, and before Isabel could protest further, they had her in handcuffs. Her once perfectly composed figure now looked wild and desperate, her hair falling out of place, her makeup smeared from the heat of the confrontation. The guests watched in shock as Isabel, now fully exposed, was led away by the police.
I'll make you pay for this, Isabel shouted over her shoulder as the officers escorted her toward the door. This isn't over, Maya. I'll make sure you regret this.
Maya stood next to her father, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle heavily on her shoulders. Her legs were shaky, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of the confrontation with Isabel. She couldn't believe it was finally over. Isabel was gone. The police had taken her away, her shrill protests and threats echoing in Maya's mind like a bad dream. The woman who had almost destroyed her family had been led out in handcuffs, fully exposed for who she truly was. But the danger hadn't been in. Isabel's final outburst. It had been in the weeks of manipulation, the layers of deception, and the calm, convincing lies she had built up over time. It was a plan so cunning, so carefully crafted, that no one, not even David, had seen through it, until Maya did. David was still in shock, standing silently beside Maya, his face pale and his expression one of disbelief. He hadn't spoken much since the police took Isabel away, as if the full weight of what had just happened hadn't yet sunk in. Maya could feel the tension radiating from him, the guilt, the confusion, the deep hurt of realizing just how close he had come to making the worst mistake of his life. Maya glanced up at him, unsure of what to say. The truth had come out, but at a cost. Isabel had been someone David trusted, someone he thought he would spend his life with, and Maya had been forced to tear that trust apart in front of everyone. She knew it wasn't easy for him to accept, and she wasn't sure how much of his shock came from Isabel's betrayal, and how much came from the fact that his own daughter had seen what he hadn't. After a few moments, David finally turned to Maya, his eyes heavy with emotion.
I don't even know where to start, he said quietly, his voice cracking. I can't believe I didn't see it.
Maya's heart ached for him. She had been so focused on stopping the wedding, on exposing Isabel, that she hadn't fully considered what it would mean for David to face the truth. This wasn't just about financial ruin. It was about trust, love, and the realization that the person he thought cared for him had been lying from the beginning.
You couldn't have known, Dad, Maya said softly, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. She was really good at hiding it. I barely figured it out myself.
David shook his head, his hand coming up to cover his face as he let out a shaky breath. I should have listened to you. When you first tried to talk to me about her, He paused, his voice breaking with regret. I didn't want to believe that the woman I was going to marry could be capable of something like this. Maya could see the guilt weighing on him, but she didn't want him to carry that burden alone.
It's not your fault, she said, her voice firmer now. She fooled everyone. You were just trying to be happy, and there's nothing wrong with that.
David's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, he looked at her not with confusion or doubt, but with pure gratitude.
You saved me, Maya, he said, his voice thick with emotion. If you hadn't stepped up, if you hadn't been brave enough to speak out when everyone else was convinced everything was fine, I don't even want to think about what would have happened.
Maya swallowed hard, trying to keep her own emotions in check. She had spent the last few weeks feeling like she was screaming into the void, like no one would ever believe her. But now, hearing her father say those words, it made everything worth it. The sleepless nights, the fear, the guilt, it had all been worth it to keep him safe.
I couldn't let her hurt you, Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't just sit there and do nothing.
David's hand rested gently on her shoulder, and Maya could feel the warmth of his touch, a silent acknowledgement of everything she had done.
I'm so proud of you, he said, his voice steady now, filled with a depth of emotion that Maya hadn't heard from him in a long time. I don't know if I would have had the courage to do what you did. Standing up like that, going against everyone, even me. It took guts.
Maya's eyes welled up with tears. She had been holding everything in for so long, pushing down the fear and the frustration, trying to stay strong because she knew she had to. But now, standing here with her father, knowing that he finally understood what she had been fighting for, the floodgates opened.
I just wanted to protect you, Maya whispered, the tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't want you to get hurt.
David pulled her into a tight hug, holding her close as the weight of everything finally settled over them both.
You did, he said softly. You did protect me, more than I even realized.
For a long moment, they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the enormity of what had just happened wash over them. The room was still, the guests gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya felt a sense of peace. The danger was over. Isabel was gone. And despite everything that had happened, she and her father were going to be okay. When they finally pulled away, David wiped at his eyes, giving her a small, tired smile. I owe you a big apology, he said, his voice soft but sincere. I should have trusted you from the beginning. I was so caught up in wanting things to be perfect that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Maya shook her head. It's okay, she said. You didn't know, but you do now. David nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. I do, he said quietly. I just wish it hadn't taken something like this for me to wake up. Maya reached out and squeezed his hand. The important thing is that you're safe. That's all that matters. David smiled at her, a genuine, grateful smile that made Maya's heart swell. She had spent so long feeling like she was fighting this battle alone, but now she knew she wasn't. They were in this together, and nothing could break the bond they shared. As the two of them stood there, the sun beginning to set outside the large windows, casting a warm glow over the now empty hall, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Hope for the future, for the life they would rebuild together, without Isabel's shadow looming over them. I don't know what I would have done without you, Maya, David said after a long pause, his voice filled with emotion. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life, and I'll never forget that. Maya smiled, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from her shoulders. I'll always have your back, Dad, she said, no matter what. David pulled her into another hug, and this time there were no more words. They didn't need them. Everything they had been through, everything they had faced together, it was all behind them now. As they stood there, the warmth of their bond stronger than ever, Maya knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and her father could face them together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The days following the disastrous wedding were quiet but heavy with emotion. David and Maya spent much of the time processing everything that had happened, the echoes of Isabel's betrayal still fresh in their minds. The house felt different, like a weight had been lifted but left behind an emptiness that couldn't quite be filled. The once vibrant energy surrounding the wedding preparations had dissipated, replaced by the somber reality of what could have been a life-altering mistake. David had retreated into himself for a while, grappling with the shame and guilt of almost marrying someone who had planned to destroy him. He'd often sit in the living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. Maya knew he needed time. She gave him space but made sure he knew she was there for him whenever he was ready to talk. Maya herself had been going through waves of emotion. Relief that the danger was gone, grief for her father's heartbreak, but mostly a lingering fear that maybe, if things had gone just a little differently, her father would have been caught in Isabel's trap. She couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to losing everything. Yet, alongside that fear, she felt a growing sense of strength. She had done something hard, something scary, but ultimately right. On the third morning after the wedding, Maya came downstairs to find David in the kitchen, making coffee. His face looked drawn, and the exhaustion in his eyes was undeniable. But there was something different about him, an openness, a readiness to finally confront everything they had been avoiding. Hey, he said softly when he saw her, offering a weak smile. I made you some breakfast. Maya smiled back, appreciating the gesture. They sat at the small kitchen table, neither saying anything for a few moments, the silence comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. I've been thinking a lot, David began, breaking the silence. His voice was low, his words careful. About everything. About Isabel, and about you. Maya looked up at him, her heart pounding slightly as she waited for him to continue. I was wrong, Maya, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I didn't listen to you when I should have. I dismissed you, and I let myself be blinded by what I wanted to see, not what was really happening. I'm so sorry. Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, It didn't bring the sense of victory she thought it might. Instead, it was just sadness. A sadness for her father's pain, for everything they had gone through. "I know, Dad," she said softly. "It's okay. I understand why you didn't see it." David shook his head, guilt clouding his eyes. "No, it's not okay. You saw the truth when I couldn't, and you tried to tell me. I should have listened to you from the start." He looked at her, his gaze intense, but filled with love. "I need to do better. I need to trust you more. You've always had my best interests at heart, and I'll never doubt you like that again." Maya reached out, placing her hand over his. "It's not about trusting me more," she said, her voice calm. "It's about trusting yourself too. You're a good person, Dad. You didn't do anything wrong by wanting to believe the best in someone. But now you know. We both do. And we'll be more careful in the future."
David smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I'm so lucky to have you," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "You're stronger than I ever realized. I don't think I've told you that enough."
Maya's heart warmed at his words, the love between them palpable. The bond they shared had been tested, but it was stronger now, forged in the fire of what they had just survived. Over the next few days, they began to heal, little by little. There were still difficult moments, flashes of anger from David as he processed how close he had come to losing everything, nights when Maya lay awake, reliving the tension of standing up in front of the crowd, terrified that no one would believe her. But they worked through it together. David had started talking more, reflecting on the warning signs he had missed. They would sit in the living room in the evenings, David apologizing again and again for doubting her, and Maya reassuring him that they were moving forward. "You know," David said one night, looking at her with soft eyes, "I've always thought I was the one protecting you. But these past few weeks, you've shown me how wrong I was. You've been protecting me." Maya smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We protect each other, Dad. That's what family does." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think I forgot that for a while. I was so focused on what I thought I needed that I didn't realize what was right in front of me. You. Us. I let someone come between us, and I'll never make that mistake again." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and comfort of his presence. They had been through so much, but they were coming out the other side stronger, more connected than ever before. The deception that had nearly torn them apart had only served to bring them closer, reinforcing the trust and love they had for each other. As the days turned into weeks, life slowly returned to a new normal. The house, once filled with the remnants of wedding preparations, was now a place of quiet reflection and healing. David focused on work and rebuilding his life, but with a newfound sense of caution. He no longer rushed into things without first seeking Maya's input, their communication open and honest in a way it hadn't been before. Maya, too, felt a change in herself. She wasn't just the daughter who needed protecting. She was someone capable of protecting those she loved, and she knew now that her voice mattered, that she could stand up for what was right, even when it seemed like the whole world was against her. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, David spoke quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so grateful for you, Maya. I don't know what I would have done without you. I want you to know that I'll always trust you from now on. I'll always listen." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with love for her father. "I know, Dad," she said softly. "And I'll always be here to look out for you. That's what we do. We take care of each other." The sun cast its golden light across the yard, and as they sat together in comfortable silence, both of them knew that the storm had passed. The deception was behind them, and what remained was the unbreakable bond of family, a bond that could weather any challenge, any betrayal, because it was built on love, trust, and the knowledge that no matter what, they would always have each other. They had faced the darkest of times, but together they had found the light.